Good afternoon. Really lovely to see you all. And well done for still being here and not being at the pub. Quite impressive. I want to talk to you about three numbers today. 1 million users, 1.6 billion, and 53%. Not sure if anyone can guess what those three numbers have in common. I'm trying to rack their brain for all the other stats they've heard over the last 2 days. 1 billion users is how many users ChatGPT had in just 5 days. 1.6 billion is the monthly website visitors they have. And 53% of people apparently cannot tell that ChatGPT content was not created by humans and was generated by AI. My name's Natalie Cramp. I'm the CEO of a data consultancy called Profusion. And I'm here today really to tell you why we have to care about those numbers. Why do these numbers matter? Don't know if anyone knows who this is. Have we got any nods? Anyone recognise her? Yeah, we've got a few hands up. Back in 2020, Timnit Gebru cared about this. Many of you may know her story, but in 2020, she was worrying about LLMs. As the co-leader of a group at Google looking into the social and ethical ramifications of large language models and AI, she was doing her latest research paper. And she was ordered to retract it. And if she wasn't prepared to retract it, she had to remove her team's names and her name as authors for it. And this was all saying, these are some of the potential pitfalls of these large language models. And in her job at Google, she had been asked to look into the ethical ramifications of AI. So she was doing her job. She was given a week to act. And so she came back and she gave some different options of how this could be handled. The next thing she knew, she was being asked by one of her team if she'd resigned. To this day, she maintains that she was fired. Google maintained that she resigned. Perhaps we'll never know the truth. But there followed quite a large resignation of many of the people involved in ethics at Google. So why does that matter? Well, I think that one story tells us that we cannot trust the large tech companies to mark their own homework. And if we can't do that, then as we play with these very exciting innovations in technology, it is beholden on all of us to really think about the ethical ramifications of them. It becomes the responsibility of each and every one of us to think about data ethics and how we make sure that we are not falling into some of the pitfalls and creating negative consequences of the great innovations that are going on. And this talk is not about not encouraging innovation, but it is about thinking about how you do it. And it matters more than ever in a world of generative AI. And why is that? Well, yes, there's a lot of hype about it, but also we're slightly losing control of data in our organizations. If you think about it before, really you could control what was going on with data in your organizations because mostly it went through the data team. Or they may not have formally been called a data team, but whoever were the people who were looking after the data. And pretty much if you wanted much to happen with it, you had to go to your data team to get it done. Now, all of a sudden, anyone and everyone can be playing with these tools that are out in the market, and they can be using your data, giving away your data to goodness knows who, and potentially using it in a way that maybe doesn't benefit your customers or your employees in the way that you might want them to. And that's not because anyone's trying to do anything like really awful and people are evil, but a bit like with cybersecurity, human error is the thing that tends to cause us problems. So, got a bit of a question for you. If you scan the QR code, you can go on and do these polls. The code is #ProfusionBDL. So quite interested just in where your companies are at, not you personally, but where you feel your company is at, on a scale of nervous to excited when it comes to data and AI. So are you like sort of 1 star, are you nervous, a little bit wary? Somewhere in the middle, you know, we're taking a bit of a balanced approach. There's some good stuff, some of it's hype. We think there's some potential knock-on consequences. Cautiously optimistic or super excited, like we are all over this is our future, we love it, sod the consequences. We got some votes. Okay, so we're changing by the minute, but we're pretty much sitting between wary and somewhere in the middle is where the greatest proportion of us are going. There is some excitement, which is good. There are some nerves. That's good. We want a healthy balance of nerves and excitement. But how do we deal with those nerves? Well, we can look to the law. But whilst a lot of the various countries are sort of motoring to try and catch up, and we're seeing these summits that are happening with governments, fundamentally technology moves faster than the law. So we can't look to the law to help us, because the law is going to be the bare minimum. It's going to be the thing that's caught up with the thing that was happening in technology a year or 2 years ago. So therefore it falls to us and all of us and our companies to answer the question for ourselves, which is the fundamental question: just because you can, should you be doing it? There are all sorts of things that we can do, but ethics is really about making those choices about whether just because we can, should we? So I've got another question for you, and before you answer, this is not a who should be, this is who is actually doing it. In reality, not who you think the tick box answer is that you would give on a compliance training, but who is actually doing it. And what I realise is I probably should have put an answer of no one, which I haven't given you, but you can choose other. So who's currently worrying about data ethics, making it happen, responsible for it in your organisation? Interesting. So we've got the majority just about saying everyone or other, but we've got quite a lot of people saying the data, the compliance team or the DPO. So my next question is, who should be responsible for it? Okay, you all get a gold star. Sadly, I don't have any prizes to give you, but yes, the answer is everyone should be responsible for this. This is something that is part of all of our jobs on a daily basis. But if the answer is everybody, how do we equip people to be able to make these decisions? How do we help them be able to navigate that key question? Because I think one of the things that people make a mistake about is that this isn't a compliance exercise. This is not something where I'm going to give you all a list today, you're going to go away with it, and you're going to tick all the boxes, and once you've ticked all the boxes, you can go, phew, done, nothing's going to go wrong, it's all sorted. This isn't a checklist, because the technology will continue to change, and the decisions are going to depend on your organisation. So we've got to be able to sort that out ourselves, because it's a set of judgment calls. And there are fundamental principles we can all follow. There are things that are universal for everyone, but there are also things that are judgment calls based on our organisation, who we are, what our values are, and what we stand for. So to give you a little bit of an example, I don't know if I've got anyone from Meta in the room, and I really don't mean to insult you if I do, but people make different judgment calls. Meta have a very clear strategy of what they're trying to achieve. And let's be honest, they're prepared to take the odd fine and the odd bad headline along the way about the way that they're using data. But if you're a charity that's looking after very vulnerable people, or if you're the NHS, probably it's not okay to sort of take those risks. You're probably going to have to take a much more risk-based approach. And as a consultancy, we do lots of work for lots of different organisations. One of them is a luxury automotive company. And they really want to target their people at the right time when they're in the market to buy a car, not, frankly, piss them off the rest of the time by hassling them. And so we've built a propensity to buy algorithm that's sort of plugged into their sales force. I'm not sure many people are going to be upset that they don't get hassled for the 2-3 years they're not buying a car and then they get contacted in their buying window. But you apply that exact same algorithm into Ladbrokes, and you're suddenly predicting when people are going to gamble, and you're targeting them then. So it's not always about the algorithm, it's not always about the thing you're doing, it's about your situation and your organisation and your customers and your end users and your employees. And that's why who you are as an organisation really matters in ethics. And that's something that you all have to define for yourself, which is why there's not a simple checklist that everyone can follow. So what can help us make these judgment calls? I'm not going to be able to give you all the answers in 30 minutes today, but there are a few simple things we can consider when we support people to make these decisions. And it's not always about making the most ethical choice. We do data ethics training, and people play this game, and they think, oh, I'll do the answer that obviously is going to get me a gold star for being ethical. But we actually score their points on, is it also commercial? Does it also hit the people goals in your organization? Because realistically, life isn't perfect, and you are going to be having to make those judgment calls. So I always ask people whether they're making their stakeholders sad. Bear with me, it's a bit of a rubbish acronym, but it's the one I could come up with. Some really simple questions you can ask yourselves to get yourselves started. So the sunlight test, most of you are probably aware of this, but basically, if you told your customers, if it was in the paper tomorrow, what you were doing with their data, your employees, whoever's data you're using, would people feel okay about it? Would you be comfortable that it was there, it was out there, and that they knew what they were doing? Interestingly, we did some research recently, and over 70% of leaders in organizations do not feel morally comfortable with how data is being used in their organization. So it feels like we probably have quite a long way to go to pass that test. The second is accountability. One of the biggest ethical challenges comes when we do something and we do all of our DPIAs and we check all our boxes and we get it right. Someone goes, my goodness, that algorithm's brilliant, like we've just used it for these things. What I'm going to do now is do a whole nother use case using the same stuff, and no one goes back through the process. And the problem with that is, it might have been fine for the original use case, but maybe we're allowing bias, maybe there's some other problems with what we're now doing with the new use case and no one's checked it. So it's really important to be clear on the accountability for each of the data products, each of the data projects in your organization. Who is the person who is responsible? Who is the person who gets to give the okay for it to be used in a different way? So do I know who's accountable for this? Does everybody else know about that? My third question is about disadvantage. Is there any one cohort who is going to be unfairly disadvantaged by using this? I'm sure you've all seen the stuff in the papers about the recruitment algorithms that have been biased against women because they've been trained on data which have sort of skews far towards white men. It doesn't necessarily mean if we are operating with data with bias in, we can't use it, but we've got to use it knowing that, and we've got to have a plan to mitigate that. So I'm not saying as soon as there's some disadvantage in data, oh my goodness, you've all got to stop, you can't do anything. But you've got to ask yourself that question if it's going to disadvantage someone, and then what am I going to do if that's the case? How am I going to use this, and how am I going to mitigate from that? So those are my sort of three questions. And the fourth one, which is probably the most important question, is does it benefit them or just you? Because data is a value exchange, and if you can't answer how it benefits the people who are giving you the data, you are probably doing something wrong. And so if you ask yourself those four questions, hopefully it's a really good start point with everything that you're doing. No. So earlier this year, Profusion launched something we called the Good Data Guide. And we did that in partnership with the law firm Pinsent Masons. But the idea of this was, when we looked at the literature that was out there about ethics and how you navigate it, there was a lot of research, there are a lot of frameworks, but there wasn't something that really practically helped me with running my business on a daily basis. What are the questions I need to ask myself in these things? What are the things I need to put in place? And so this is a completely free toolkit, which you can access at that web address. But we looked at, well, what are the foundations that you need to put in place? Because this stuff is hard, and you can't do it all overnight. So how do you bite off some chunks to get started? How do you build on that? And then what does it mean for applications? And in fact, in October, we're launching the large language model application version that sort of looks at how do all these principles apply when you look at large language models. So when we think about foundations, people are absolutely your foundation, your first foundation. And I think across talks, I don't know whether you've been here for the full 2 days, but I think we've probably heard this message quite a lot. But equally, everyone forgets it. But our people are absolutely at the heart of our success. And particularly now, data is being used across your organization. Generative AI is out there. People in any team can be using it. You cannot make good judgment calls if you are not informed. We cannot expect it to be reasonable for people to do that. So we have to invest in educating our workforce. And this is not me saying, right, you guys all need to go back and create a coding academy and teach your whole organization how to code. But we do need to train our people in the basics of data ethics. We do need to train our people in the data fundamentals to understand how to use it day to day in their role. And it starts at the top. It has to start with our leaders because they're setting the direction, they're making the spending decisions, they're the ones who are demanding certain things of us. And so it's really, really important that they understand it. We did some research to see how data literate are people really, and we made them all do tests. And it's quite interesting because 82% of decision makers expect basic data literacy from employees. But if you look at who's investing in it, we're quite a long way away from that. So we need to make some different choices in how we're doing things. The other thing I hear quite a lot when I go and talk to people about, okay, can you come in, can you help us train our workforce? We don't need to worry with the entry-level talent. They're all young, they know all about data, it's great. Actually, only 21% of 16 to 24-year-olds are considered data literate. This is a skill we all need to learn. And it's not one and done. We need to keep learning it, right? Because the technology changes, the opportunities change. So this is not something that you do once and say, oh, right, done. In the same way as we continue to train in communication skills and leadership skills for the different ages, this should be something that's happening in your organization all the time. Only 34% of senior data leaders are data literate, and I might add, people did score like 80, 90% on this, so we weren't just really mean with the tests that we gave them. But senior leaders weren't doing great. And we CEOs, we're the worst. We're sitting at 30%. So there's quite a lot of education to happen for us to be able to make the right decisions, for us to feel morally comfortable. And it does really matter, as I mentioned, like, you know, we all do our cybersecurity training every single year. Most of the errors that happen are human errors. And we see it happen in the press. Recent case in Northern Ireland, another CEO head rolled, you know, but probably the most important thing here is people didn't feel safe. And the worst thing about that is we lose trust. And we can do the most amazing things with data. Like, it can really save lives. And in my other hat, I do a lot of work on women's health, and I'm very passionate about the fact that data can be the route to success. But it's not going to be if no one trusts us and if no one's prepared to give us their data. And unfortunately, as with all things trust, it only takes a couple of bad things to happen for it to be very, very hard to rebuild it. So it's really important we're not letting these things happen, and we're equipping people with the skills to make sure they look after them. You know, mayoral election, we had like Excel errors, meaning a load of people couldn't vote. Another chief exec's head rolled because some of his junior staff didn't know how to get a filter off Excel. Like, these simple things, because we're asking people to use data in their day-to-day roles who don't understand how to do it. So we've got to change that. We've got to support them. Sorry, I'm not doing very well with this. So I'm really interested, for some honesty, of do you, not like I train the odd person, but does your company have a program where all staff really get this sort of 21st century skill as a core part of their program? Okay, wow. Those of you who are voting can see the results. 86% of people saying no. Only 6% saying yes, well done, whoever, that's probably about 3 of you, well done, wherever you are. And maybe you can help us at the end. And a few people planning to. So if there's one thing you take away from this, please take away that people are the key to success. Maybe start thinking about some training. Doesn't have to be really big, it doesn't have to be really expensive. If you think about the amount of money you're spending on some of those vendors out there, it's a tiny, tiny, tiny proportion of that budget. And that's how you're going to get value from it. Also, it's not just about being ethical. Like, you can get Click tell us that it adds total enterprise value of 3 to 5%, which is pretty big in the era we're currently in, where budgets are really tight and it's really hard to make sales and everyone's trying to do more with less. If you could get 3 to 5% more, that would be great. So it's not just about it setting you up for ethics, but also you get far more value from it. And we do consultancy projects with all sorts of different sectors, but we also do training. And it's the ones who can spend a lot less on the consultancy projects, but put a bit of investment into the training, who really see the value from their data, because it's those people you're relying to take the next best action in their day-to-day role. And you have to think about it holistically. It's not just about getting your leaders trained, it's not just about getting your business trained. It's also about teaching your data and your technical team the business fundamentals so that everybody meets in the middle, talking the same language, and therefore creating that data culture that's going to enable you to succeed, but also keep you safe and secure. So we talked about education. If you couldn't guess, I'm quite passionate about it. Second part of people is diversity. Diversity has again been talked about a lot across different stages. It's not just a nice to do, it's not just a moral thing. So many of the problems that we look at in some of the things about data and AI that have come out in the press, if you look at the team who are training that data, if you look at the project team around it, there's very little diversity in it. How do we change that? Well, there's lots of ways. I know it's hard, and I know it doesn't happen overnight. I run a business myself. We have been working hard on it too. We are recruiting from the same pool, but we have managed to get to 50-50 women and men, which, you know, in our industry is quite hard. We are making progress. We've got more to do to bring more black talent into our organization. And there's lots of ways, and you've probably heard them in other talks, you know, partner with women in data, partner with black in data, get involved with universities and schools programs to start to bring this talent through. But that all takes time. And I'm a really practical person of, okay, but I still need to get shit done now. So if I don't have a very diverse team training these algorithms, what can I do right now? Well, think about how you combat that. Where do you have focus groups or other people in your organization or your end users who you can bring in to be able to start to mitigate some of that risk? And how do you set yourself up so that you have got diversity of thought in the room as you go about approaching things? So people, absolutely the first foundation. And the second foundation is all about how you go beyond compliance. And I'm given signs at the back, so I definitely don't have time to sort of teach you the whole guide today. But I just wanted to give you a few things that maybe you could take away after today and think about. Some of them you might already be doing. The first is not to think, oh, bloody hell, like a load more stuff for my to-do list. I've got to go and create this whole data ethics thing. It's not a whole new bureaucracy. It starts with really, really good, robust security and data protection policies. So make sure those are in place. There are so many organizations I talk to who are still struggling to do GDPR right. So let's get those basics right first and build on what we have. And when you do put your policies in place, whether that's about generative AI or whether that's about data protection, don't just do it and put it on a shelf and say, well, or save it on OneDrive and go, good and done, right, I've got my policy, pat myself on the back, it's all sorted. We all know that is not how you get stuff done. So get the policy written, but make sure it's educated and goes through the organization, and make sure there's some form of auditing on that. Like, you know, what's your spot check-in on certain projects to make sure it's happening? Because that's when you know it's really working. So a policy that is circulated and understood, and also think about how you integrate it. So maybe you have a social media policy as well. Don't just have it over here. If you really want to get people in the organization to use it, it needs to be in the policies that they actually care about. So integrate it through the other key policies that it applies to. The second is positive and transparent comms always. I don't know, I'm not going to embarrass you by asking, but how many people in this room feel really confident that their privacy notices that people have to sign up to and their privacy policies are super clear, super easy to understand, and if my mum was sitting here reading it, she would be completely able to understand it and understand what it means to her. We've all signed up to websites where it's like streams and streams of information that we can't read, and therefore we just approve and we hope for the best, and goodness knows what we're doing with our data. Give yourself a task to go back to the basic fundamentals. What do they really know that I'm needing with their data? Put it through a readability checker. Can people understand it? Always be positive about it, always communicate. If in doubt, over-communicate to your customers. The more transparent you are, the more people will trust you. The third is simplicity is king or queen, big on diversity, in algorithm design. I think sometimes we can get excited with the art of the possible and we forget about the reason we were doing it. And so we quite often overcomplicate the thing that we're building, when actually to get to the end goal, we maybe don't need something as complicated as that. So again, really challenge yourself with, do I need to make this more complicated? What's the simplest way that I can do this? Because if it's simpler, there's less likely to be things go wrong. And the final one is, we really seem to blindly trust that the big software and tech vendors have this all nailed. And of course, if it's insert whoever's name, it will be fine. That is not true. So you need to be demanding of them to make sure that you can see their risk assessments and what their mitigations are in order to be able to do it. So my other tip would be quite demanding of them when you're working with them to really make sure you're confident that they're looking after you properly. Interested how many of you have got round to putting a generative AI policy in your company yet? We had this conversation at our Data Ethics Advisory Board the other day. Lots of people were thinking about it, but not everybody was there. But you guys seem to be doing pretty well. Lots of people thinking about it. About a quarter of you have got one in place. That's not bad, to be honest, for a room of people. Maybe find the ones who have afterwards. Maybe they can send you their template so you can get started. Maybe ask generative AI to do you a start of a template. The other thing I really want to remind people is a good investment in data, a good investment in technology is about the goals you have. We can get so caught up in what we can do, but do we have a clear data strategy? Do we know what we're going after? And then does it support that? Because if it doesn't, we probably shouldn't be doing it. And quite a lot of the ethical complications people run into is because they're doing things that actually are probably slightly outside of what they were trying to do as an organization in the first place. But we've got so excited by the art of the possible that we've sort of deviated from the thing that we're actually meant to be doing. So if you're also trying to support your organization to use these tools right, make sure you're clear with them about what data should be using for, where you're gunning for, what your organization wants to achieve, what your data strategy wants to achieve. Then they're operating within that framework. They've got their guardrails, they've got their policy, they've got their strategy, and then innovation can really happen safely. And I always talk about tools being the icing on the cake and not the cake itself. Technology is there to help you get there. It's not the thing in and of its own right? It's there to help us. That's why we have to really be clear on what we're trying to achieve before we bring all these new tools in. And if we do that, we normally use them in a better way. So I wanted to leave you with a few thoughts that maybe you could take away from this to help you get started, because this is a lifelong journey for all of us. We have to check in on this all the time. We're not going to get it right all the time, and that's okay, but we need to be transparent and we need to communicate when we don't, because that continues to build trust. Don't think anyone's expecting you to be perfect in the data ethics space, but they do expect you to be trying. So get your data training done. Most of you in this room need to think about that. Have your clear data strategy that supports your business strategy. I know the answer from some of the businesses I work with is, what business strategy? That's not very clear to me either. Maybe start with your customer journey, map that out, and then do your data strategy supporting that. Start there. And then give clarity to your organization. Really give them the rules, the framework, the policies that they need to safely innovate. Because otherwise they are just batting in the dark, and they're quite likely to make human error in that, but it's not because of bad intent. So give them the playground to play in so they're not playing in the street. And you know, I've said, yes, stick to your data strategy. That doesn't mean don't go and innovate, but maybe do some work together on the use cases you want to innovate and think about, and again, create the safe space for them to do that. And if you forget everything else I've said today, hopefully you will remember our 4 questions. Are you making your stakeholders sad? Does it pass the sunlight test? If somebody knew I was doing this, would I be okay with that? Do I know who's accountable for this in my organization? Do I know who to go to if this goes wrong? If I want to use it differently? Does it disadvantage any one cohort? If it does, have I got a mitigation plan? And of course, does it benefit them or does it just benefit me? So thank you very much for listening to me today. It was really lovely to see you all. Thank you for sticking with us to the end of the day. I hope that's useful. If I can be of use to anybody, really happy to stay around and have a chat, and I'll be in the Women in Data Lounge later.